Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 24th of October, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. So this morning, the top 6 reasons that Rush Limbaugh is wrong or goes wrong. Number 1, he analyzes the arbitrary. This is the reason that he's tired. This is the reason that he takes as much time off as he takes. And the reason I think that he's not going to last too much longer. Maybe maybe 2 to 5 years or thereabouts. And I think he's going to throw in the towel after that, because he wastes his time analyzing arbitrary claims. As Ayn Rand identified, there are people that make claims that are arbitrary, and arbitrary means they produce no evidence, no proof for their claims. For instance, let's take a look at President Trump and the talk about impeaching Trump. On what basis? No answer. Nobody on the left says why they want to impeach Trump. What is it that he has done wrong? What grand crime or misdemeanor has he committed that is worth impeaching him for? No answer. It's therefore an arbitrary claim, and it must be ignored. He has, Rush Limbaugh does, a huge stack of stuff on his plate every day, and most of it he doesn't get to because he wastes his time with the arbitrary, with claims that have been there's no evidence, there's no proof for. He could go through those real quick. All he has to do is say, this claim over here, this story over here, completely arbitrary, there's no proof for it, and I'm ignoring it. Go on to the next one. And then that way he can get to the stories that have valid claims or apparently valid claims and analyze those stories, if there are any. If there aren't any, then he can get on to stuff that's even better, which is the good news. Let's go ahead and get on to the things that are going right in our economy, because to listen to Rush Limbaugh, nothing is going right in this country. As a matter of fact, to listen to Rush Limbaugh, you'd think we're on the verge of a revolution. And he said so much to Sean Hannity the other day, hey, we're on the verge of losing this country. No. But anyways, he needs to quit with the arbitrary. If he wants to feel better about his job, he wants to be less tired, less beaten down each and every day and during the course of the week, and have his morale, be up as much as possible. Quit dealing with the arbitrary. Number 2, he's a drag on morale. He spends so much time, and like I just touched on, dealing with negatives. And arbitrary negatives, petty negatives nobody gives a rat's ass about. And because he spends all of his time with his head in Washington, D.C., concerning himself with what's going on in Washington, who said what in Washington, D.C., he's deluded into believing that this country is on the verge of revolution, or it's on the verge of a civil war, or we're on the verge of losing this country. BS. What he needs to do is get out of his Southern Command, get out of his house every once in a while, and walk around amongst the normal people, like the rest of us do. When I go out each and every day, I'm all over the place. I deliver things for a living, and I'm all over the city every day. And people, traffic, that's an exception. People honk at each other, flip each other off, and whatnot. But other than that, people are friendly. People are relaxed. People are treating each other, even in traffic situations a lot of times. Most of the time, people are polite. They allow you to get into traffic. They allow you to change lanes, that kind of thing. And when you're out and about, people will open doors for you. They say please and thank you and good morning and good night and ask you how you're doing. All kinds of things like that. So the tension that he thinks is in the air, and I'm sure he probably believes that this country is really on the verge of civil war, but it isn't. But the reason he believes it is because he spends too much time obsessed with what it is that's going on in Washington, because he thinks that as goes our politics, so goes our culture, so goes the rest of the country. Not true. The opposite is actually true. Number 3, he doesn't know or understand the left. He claims to. He keeps saying he knows the left better than every square inch of his glorious naked body. Baloney. He doesn't. And I read books all the time, every week, from Tammy Bruce, from David Horowitz, and from others that do understand the left. I understand the left better than Rush Limbaugh did because I grew up in it. I grew up with Dutch immigrants. The woman was a socialist, although she never made any political statements. The way she behaved, the way she acted, and the fact that she hated this country. This country gave her everything. She came from a country that was devastated. She got here in 1960. That was devastated by World War II. And this country gave her everything. They were able to buy a house. They had their brand new automobiles. They had, as they used to tell me, a roof over the head, a bed to sleep in, and food in their mouth, which was 3 times more than what they had when they lived in Holland. But was she grateful? Hell no. She hated this country, literally hated this country. And she did so because she was a socialist. And so I grew up in a socialist household. I know what the socialists, the lefts, are really all about, and Rush Limbaugh does not. He always forgets that what it is that the left wants has nothing to do with short-term political gains. He keeps saying, well, the left wants to win an election, or the left wants to destroy this country. The left doesn't care about this country. The true left is concerned with the globe, the world, the entire world. They want to see all national borders go away, all of them, not just the United States. I'm sure they feel that if the borders of the United States go away, they're setting an example for other countries, and other countries will dissolve their borders, or there will be revolutions to dissolve the borders of other countries, and we will end up with one world government, basically socialism, and we'll usher in socialist paradise. That's what they're looking for. It's what they've always been looking for since 1850, when Marx wrote the Capitalist Manifesto, or the Communist Manifesto, or whatever it is that he wrote all of his trashy books, and making predictions that socialism was destined to win out over capitalism. The only difference now is that there's a lot of old communists like George Soros that are just about dead that want to see the revolution before they die. So there's a sense of urgency. Okay, they're not going to wait anymore. A lot of times on the left it was, well, time's not right, we have to compromise, we have to do this. Left is tired of compromising. They want their paradise, and they want it now. And again, Rush Limbaugh doesn't understand that. So number 4, Rush Limbaugh doesn't understand reality. And and that's, I've already touched on that. He doesn't understand the reality of what's really taking place in the country. Again, he thinks that what's going on in the country, what he thinks, what he sees on the news, and what he hears from politicians is the way the country actually is. It is no such thing. And again, if he wants to know reality, get out of the house. Get out of Southern Command, go walk around and deal with real people, and he'll find out what reality is. Number 5, his analysis is shallow. And it's shallow because he starts with backwards thinking. He thinks that politics is what informs our culture. And I know he thinks this because he has said so explicitly on his broadcast. And he's wrong. As Ayn Rand has identified, it's the opposite way. Philosophy informs our culture informs our politics. That's why there's a lag time, a lead time before it is that things come into being. you have marijuana, for instance. People have been agitating to legalize the recreational use of marijuana since the 1960s, perhaps even earlier than that. But it isn't until just now that marijuana is now becoming it's popular, fashionable to legalize the recreational use of marijuana, where I think 16 states have gone ahead, including the state of California, have legalized marijuana. And by the way, for no good reason. They did it just by force, by being persistent and just all the time, why not legalize, why not legalize, why not legalize, trying to trick people into proving a negative and doing so very successfully. And the number 6 thing that makes him rather ineffective is he is cryptic. On his show, he has all kinds of cryptic little statements that nobody really understands except him. He reminds me of a person that I've known that was that used to tell jokes that only she understood, and they would chuckle. Tell this little short little joke, but you say something, you do something, and then she make this little remark and then start chuckling, and she's the only one in the room that knew what she was talking about. And he does the same thing with his little cryptic remarks, like for those of you in Rio Linda, and he offers an explanation. For those of you in Rio Linda, this means whatever. Why? Who are the people in Rio Linda? What do they got to do with anything? He refers to schools not as schools but as screwels. What does that mean? What's up with that? And all of these things hurt his integrity. They hurt his credibility. And if without integrity and credibility, you don't have any influence, or at least you don't have maximum influence. Rush Limbaugh's been on the air for 30 years. 30 years. Look at a lot of what's going on with the left right now. Does the left sound or seem like it's going away, or it's dying, or it's not going to... it's going to disappear anytime soon? Doesn't to me. And I don't hear people talking the way Rush Limbaugh talks. I don't hear more people, because people listen to Rush Limbaugh in California, but California hasn't gone any farther conservative, and California used to be a rather conservative state. Our governor was Ronald Reagan. Orange County was solidly Republican place. So, and now look at it. They're fighting Donald Trump and suing the federal government every chance they got. We have measures like rent control and the legalization of the recreational use of marijuana. Where's Rush Limbaugh's influence? He has very, very little. And he has very little because he doesn't have enough credibility, and he doesn't have enough credibility because he lacks integrity. Doesn't have maximum amount of integrity. The nice thing for Rush Limbaugh is all of these things are fixable. He can fix these things, starting with, like I said, number 1 issue, quit dealing with the arbitrary. Then you're going to have strength and energy and time to devote to serious issues. Okay, so today, when we come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand lexicon and then from the 10 books that screwed up the world. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And I love the Ayn Rand lexicon because, again, it devotes time to concepts. The materialists, the people on the left, they're materialistic, they're deterministic, they're skeptical, etc. And materialism is the idea that nothing except that which you can touch and feel exists. Meaning, concepts don't exist. That justice is just a word. It's a rather meaningless and arbitrary word, and it means what the majority decides it means at any given time. Baloney. That's not the case. So, again, going with the Ayn Rand lexicon, she explains and gets to the essences of some very important concepts. So today's concept is competition. Competition is a byproduct of productive work. not its goal. A creative man is motivated by the desire to achieve, not by the desire to beat others. A competition presupposes some basic principles held in common by all the competitors, such as the rules of the game in athletics or the functions of the free market in business. The only actual factor required for the existence of free competition is the unhampered, unobstructed operation of the mechanisms of a free market. The only action which a government can take to protect free competition is laissez-faire, which in free translation means hands off. But the antitrust laws established exactly opposite conditions and achieved the exact opposite of the results that they have been intended to achieve. There is no way to legislate competition. There are no standards by which one could define who should compete with whom, how many competitors should exist in any given field, what should be their relative strength or their so-called relevant markets, what prices they should charge, what methods of competition are fair or unfair. None of these can be answered because these precisely are the questions that can be answered only by the mechanism of a free market. The concept of free competition enforced by law is a grotesque contradiction in terms. It means forcing people to be free at the point of a gun. It means protecting people's freedom by the arbitrary rule of unanswerable bureaucratic edicts. Competition, properly so called, rests on the activity of separate, independent individuals owning and exchanging private property in the pursuit of their self-interest. It arises when two or more such individuals become rivals for the same trade. The competition which takes place under capitalism acts to regulate prices simply in accordance with the full costs of production and with the requirements of earning a rate of profit. It does not act to drive prices to the level of marginal costs or to the point where they reflect a scarcity of capacity. The competitor who cuts his price is fully aware of the impact on other competitors and that they will try to match his price. He acts in the knowledge that some of them will not be able to afford the cut, while he is, and that he will eventually pick up their business. He is able to afford the cut when and if his productive efficiency is greater than theirs, which lowers his costs to a level they cannot match. Thus, price competition under capitalism is the result of a contest of efficiency, competence, ability. Competition is an active, not a passive noun. It applies to the entire sphere of economic activity, not merely to production, but also to trade. It implies the necessity of taking action to affect the conditions of the market in one's own favor. The era of the 19th century observers was that they restricted a wide abstraction competition to a narrow set of particulars, to the passive competition projected by their own interpretation of classical economics. As a result, they concluded that the alleged failure of this fictitious passive competition negated the entire theoretical structure of classic economics, including the demonstration of the fact that laissez-faire is the most efficient and productive of all possible economic systems. They concluded that a free market, by its nature, leads to its own destruction, and they came to the grotesque contradiction of attempting to preserve the freedom of the market by government controls, i.e., to preserve the benefits of laissez-faire by abrogating it. So a couple of comments on this. First of all, that the reason for controls was back in 1900, I believe it was, a guy named Herbert Crowley, and he's the one that was supposed to be the father of the quote progressive unquote movement. But I refuse to refer to these people as progressives. Okay, they're not. There's nothing about them that is progressive, and to call them progressive and oppose them is then to concede the point that if they're progressive and I oppose them, I must therefore be automatically regressive. So I refer to them as Crowleyists. Herbert Crowley wrote a book called The Promise of American Life. In it, he said that there is a promise to American life, and that the promise of American life is ever-increasing prosperity, that I should earn more than my parents, that my children should earn more than I, that my grandchildren should earn more than my children, etc., etc., etc. His big complaint was in what was referred to at the time as boom and bust economy, and that the economy would go great gangbusters and be on fire, and everything would be going great, and then the bubble would burst. The economy would tumble into either a recession or a depression, and people, again, losing jobs, losing money, and his theory is that there's no way to have ever-increasing prosperity with a boom or bust economy, so therefore what we're going to do is we're going to regulate things, and then that's going to be able to straighten out the economy and give us the ever-increasing prosperity that he says is the promise of American life. And that's where Keynesian economics comes in. And we're all Keynes. The whole world operates on Keynesian economics. There may be people that call themselves capitalists, people that call themselves socialists. I don't care. You're operating on a Keynes system. Okay? Because it has to be that way. The whole world has to operate on one economic system. If it's a gold standard, everybody has to operate on the gold standard. You can't have some people on the gold standard, some people doing Keynes. There's no way to conduct trade that way. Okay, that's why everybody has to be on the same page economically, because we all need to trade with each other. So there we are with the Keynesian economic system, which has failed. There's a prima facie case for change to go back to the gold standard because Keynesian economics has failed. We've had recession after recession after recession, and I'd argue even a couple of depressions, but the left doesn't dare call them depressions, because to do so would be to admit defeat and admit that their little experiment has gone horribly wrong, and it has. The other part of regulation is what's fascinating. The most fascinating dynamic of regulation is that nobody bothers to sue the government. We had a situation in California in which the gas company, they had these underground storage tank that started to leak, and it all the gas would come to the surface and billowed out into the atmosphere and made people in the surrounding communities sick. So everybody has basically jumped on the gas company, including John and Ken, a couple of local talk show hosts. They've been very vocal about saying, well, the gas company, they're greedy bastards. They really suck. They didn't give a damn about anybody. They didn't make sure that the tank was properly fixed or maintained or whatever. Okay. And then, of course, the gas company is trying to maintain the cost. The courts came along and said, okay, the gas company, you have to pay for all these people to move out of their houses until this situation can be rectified, until that tank can be fixed. Okay. So they have to pay for everybody to live in a hotel or whatever. And so they have to spend a lot of money. But what nobody talks about, including John and Ken, and they should, is that it's regulated. I contend that Southern California Gas had no responsibility here whatsoever. None. Zero. The government comes to us, the politicians, the political parties, they say to us, you can't allow these evil, wicked capitalists to to operate unrestrained, because they are rapacious. They will make your life living hell. They will provide you with atrocious service, and they will overcharge you for it. Greed will be the order of the day, and this will be the whole country will be an absolute disaster. So you need to allow us to regulate. You need us to allow us to regulate these industries. In this particular case, the gas industry. So that means that the gas company has to fill out forms, they have to get permits, they have to submit to inspections. They can't just go out, and they can't also just decide, I like that piece of property over there, I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to put a storage tank of natural gas in there. Or I'm going to run a pipeline all the way up the state of California. They can't do that. They have to get permission. They have to go to the government, to the regulators, and very often to the legislature to get permission. But when everything goes wrong, when the regulators fail to do their damn job, who gets sued? Southern California Gas. Of course. Of course not. Who should be getting sued is the state of California. They should be getting sued up and down the state because they promised They said, give us, because remember, this regulation, we're paying twice. We pay Southern California Gas for their product, for their service, and then we pay regulators to regulate the industry. And then when the regulators fail to do their job, they get off scot-free. They just walk away. No, wrong. And there's other areas the same way. Our agriculture is supposed to be inspected. We don't let just anything into the country. You can't go from state to state just bringing in fruits and vegetables into, say, the state of California, because there might be fruit flies, all that kind of thing. And the state handles that. The state says, we will take care of that. We will regulate it. Pay us to do it. And we will make sure that you don't suffer. You, the average citizen, don't suffer. And there was strawberries. I don't know if they came up from Mexico or what. This was about 10, 20 years ago, that were full of some type of bacteria that sickened people and may have even killed. And you hear about it every day. There's an outbreak of listeria. Right this morning, I read about somewhere where there is supposedly some type of food product that has been, now in this particular case, the regulators got to it. It's taquitos, because the taquitos might have listeria and some other kind of bacteria that will cause people to be sick and possibly even die. But there are plenty of stories where this bacteria or whatnot gets into the food supply. People eat it, they end up getting sick, and they end up dying. Who gets sued? The people that produce the food. What about the regulators? Oh, no, don't look at them. Their only job is to prevent this from happening in the first place. Chipotle, Mexican restaurant here in California, and somebody, person or persons, went to the bathroom and didn't bother to wash their hands, contaminated the food, and guess what? Lots of people got sick. I think one or two even died. And again, the government, the political parties, the politicians, the bureaucrats got off scot-free. They're supposed to regulate restaurants and make sure everything is hunky-dory. That's why they have ratings on the windows, remember? And I'm sure Chipotle had a nice big red A on its window as it was making people sick, literally to death. Okay, so when we come back, I'm going to be reading from the 10 books that screwed up the world. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And let me see. I'm trying to get this squared away here. There it is. 10 books that screwed up the world. And so where we're at here is with, we've already covered, I can't remember the first book we did, but this one is it's about Descartes. René Descartes, who is a French so-called philosopher, and I believe it's called Discourse on Method. And so the author is going ahead and analyzing that. In contrast to this salutary realism, Descartes' method of doubting everything but his own thought. Descartes was the one that came up with the saying, I think, therefore I am. Has, for us poor moderns, made subjectivism the criterion of truth. But methodical egoism, the Latin for I is ego, isn't the only bad thing Descartes sent down the river to us. The very way he defined the I has also befouled the historical stream. Recall Descartes' strange conclusion, as he could imagine that he had no body and that there was no material world, therefore he was, quote, a substance, the whole essence or nature of which was merely to think, and which, in order to exist, needed no place and depended on no material thing, unquote. A ghastly conclusion, or rather a ghostly one, for By it, Descartes imagined that we were pure spirits trapped in alien bodies, or more accurately, as we soon find out, alien machines. As Descartes reveals in Part 5 on the Discourse on Method, he's a raving mechanist who believed that all nature was nothing more than machinery. Animals and plants are no more alive or dead than hydraulic pumps, toasters, or alarm clocks. Even more, our human bodies are merely self-running machines. Hence, Descartes is also known as the father of modern dualism. Dualism is the belief that human beings aren't one thing, an inanimate or an intimate and essential union of soul and body, but two entirely different and independent entities, a ghostly soul banging around a ghastly machine. If Descartes is the father of modern dualism, what does dualism itself beget? A walking philosophical bipolar disorder, a creature who's not at home in creation, a creature who dwells in the dual extremes, either as wholly a ghost or entirely a robot. One day he feels that he is a god, a purely spiritual being, capable of completely mastering and manipulating all nature, including his own body, as he would any machine, and the next day believes that he is purely material being, a helpless machine, entirely mastered by the mechanics of nature. This brings us to Descartes' final error, his absolutely awful proof of the existence of God, in Part 4. We recall that Descartes put as the first principle of his philosophy, I think, therefore I am. He then asserts that God must exist because he, Descartes, not God, can think of a being more perfect than himself. Therefore, he concludes, this idea was placed in me by a nature truly more perfect than I was, and this nature was God. To make matters worse, Descartes then claims that it must be the case that his ideas, quote, insofar as they are clear and distinct, cannot fail to be true, unquote, because they too come from God. Therefore, God exists because Descartes can imagine him, and all Descartes' clear and distinct ideas are absolutely true because God put them there. I pray that the readers can see the foolishness of this reasoning. I can think of a man or woman who is more perfect than I've ever met. Does this mean that either of them necessarily exists? I can think of a superior alien race existing on a much nicer planet than Earth. Does either exist? Our thinking of anything is not proof that it exists, let alone proof that whatever seems to me to be clear and distinct is given a divine stamp of authority, as if God put it there. Descartes' approach to religion is not only false, but creates the characteristically modern belief that God is whatever we, quote, very clearly and very distinctly, unquote, imagine him to be. And that means we fashion God after our own hearts, rather than our hearts and religion after God. This doesn't just lead to bad belief, but even worse, to bad non-belief. If God is whatever we very closely and distinctly imagine him to be, then if we can clearly and distinctly imagine him not to be, he isn't. To be or not to be. That becomes the modern quandary about God. But the horns of this dilemma are largely chimerical. That is, they are the horns of a mythical beast created by Descartes' imagination. His beastly reasoning has led us to reject God on the grounds that our thinking about him is fuzzy, and to accept the most ridiculous utopian fantasies about humanity because we can imagine them quite clearly and distinctly. Marxism is only the most obvious instance of the pernicious working out of Descartes' ideas, but, as we shall see, not the only one. What are the principal errors we can thank the father of modern philosophy for? First, subjectivism, which is really a thinly disguised form of egoism. We have become Cartesian insofar as we declare that there is no wisdom in the past and that whatever seems to be certain to us now must be true. Rather than leading us to greater wisdom and independence of thought, we become far more likely to affirm thoughtlessly our own unexamined opinions. Since these unexamined opinions are generally obtained from the frivolous ideas bandied about in the contemporary marketplace, we end up in the very situation Descartes satirized at the beginning of the discourse, where everyone is satisfied with his own opinion simply because, so he believes, it is his own and so it must be true. This has led to a second evil, the confusion of true wisdom about God with whatever one happens to think about God. This, of course, is the ultimate egoism, since in defining God by our own thoughts, we defined everything else accordingly. A third evil then follows from the first two, that reality is defined by what we think it to be. Descartes wanted to imagine he was some kind of disembodied ghost, that his own body and everything in nature were merely machines. The problem with this dualism is that it soon became a monism. The ghost disappeared, and we're left only with the machine. Thus, even human life came to be reduced to mere mechanism, something that could be taken apart and rebuilt to our own desires. The second and third evil then gave birth to a fourth. Since God was caused by our thinking him, then he must only be a thought and not a reality, a mere subjective projection of our own ego. Since he is not real, then he does not stand against whatever we desire to do with the machine of nature, especially the machinery of the human body. We are free to manipulate it at will and remake human nature according to our own plans, so that we can really say, in a far deeper way than Descartes, quote, I think, therefore I am, unquote, rather than taking ourselves to be made in the image of God with all the moral limitations that entails. We believe that we are self-creators with no limit but our own ever-increasing power. So, and I think most of that speaks for itself. It's absolutely spot-on analysis, and it is absolutely relevant and material to American culture today. So the next chapter is going to be chapter 3, the book called by Thomas Hobbes called Leviathan. So at this point, that's going to bring us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, I thank you for listening and have a great day.